Hello and welcome. This is Exoneree. My name is John, your personal economist and philanthropist whose life has exposed me to the many shortcomings and miscarriages of justice that this world, and particularly the United States of America, has to offer. The purpose of this channel is to tell the story of exonerees, in other words, tell the stories of people who were wrongfully convicted of crimes and spent time in prison. As I mentioned, I'm a philanthropist, so any proceeds I receive from this podcast go directly to my charity, Reform Foundation, where I help people with criminal records get jobs and maintain employment. As I mentioned, I'm also an economist, where one of our many talents is to identify inefficiencies. The entire judicial system, regardless of where you are in the world, is riddled with inefficiencies, which I will talk about in this podcast, as well as give my opinion and some suggestions and even identify financial opportunities in some cases. Please like and subscribe. So this story, excuse me, is about Gerard Domond, where I actually got my inspiration for this channel. As I mentioned in the first episode, I would like to speak with the Exoneree directly to get their full story from their time before, during, and after prison. I did manage to speak with Mr. Domond's attorney, Ronald Kuby, so hopefully I will get a chance to interview Gerard and do a follow-up on this episode. But in the meantime, I will keep the content going. Hopefully I'll be releasing at least one episode per week, so look forward to that. And without further ado, this is Exoneree number 2, Gerard Domond. Gerard Domond was born on March 24th, 1962. There's not much that I could find about his life other than what happened during his case and a little bit about his life once he got out. So what I can infer about his early life is that Domond grew up in Brooklyn, New York City, and experienced his youth as a child and as a teenager in the 1970s. Just to visualize, keep in mind that Gerard grew up right after the Civil Rights era. For instance, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968 when Gerard was just 6 years old. So this is the atmosphere at the time, and certainly something that I can imagine Gerard remembers to this day. He was a black man. He is a black man. So obviously that was something that probably affected him. And so to fast forward again to a young black man growing up in Brooklyn in the 1980s, I don't know anything about Gerard's upbringing in terms of how impoverished he was or what his family was like. But whatever situation, imagine yourself, a young black man growing up in Brooklyn. Ronald Reagan takes office a couple months before your 19th birthday, growing up with the crack epidemic and the war on drugs, which you somehow find yourself entangled in one way or another. These are the circumstances that led Gerard Domond's name to be placed at the scene of one of the most peculiar and unwarranted miscarriages of justice ever seen in the United States of America. The story which leads up to the murder of Patrick Hinkson and later conviction of Gerard Domond, from my perspective, revolves around one alleged witness, Francois Pierre. So a few minutes after 2 a.m. on March 23rd, 1987, a man who identified himself only as Thompson brought 20-year-old Patrick Bunny Hinkson to the emergency room of St. Mary's Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. Hinkson had been shot once in the head, and he did not survive. The man said Hinkson had been shot in the parking lot of a nightclub called People Love One at 1055 Washington Avenue. This Thompson fellow, we later found out's name is Paul Thompson, and according to the prosecution, he was never seen or heard from again after dropping off Hinkson. The woman who checked Hinkson ends with name was Olivia Farquharson. So by the time the police arrived to the hospital at 2:35 a.m., Paul Thompson was gone. Why security did not ask him to stay there is beyond me. The security guard who helped Paul Thompson bring Hinkson into the trauma room's name was Mr. Foy. Hinkson was in critical condition and died about an hour later without regaining consciousness. Detectives and crime scene investigators were sent to the nightclub. After searching around the club, including gas station, a dirt parking lot, and an empty lot, nothing was found that suggested a shooting had occurred. 3 days later, on March 26, 1987, Francois Pierre walked into the 77th Precinct Police Station in Brooklyn and said that he was present when Hinkson was killed. Pierre said that Gerard Domond shot Hinkson after they argued about $7,000 that Hinkson owed Domond for drugs. Domond punched Hinkson in the mouth after finding out he only had $2,000 and threw the $2,000 in the club that caused a scene with partygoers trying to pick up the money. When one of their group, a man named Yves, intervened, Hinkson said, "Let's take it outside." So side note, what's up with all these French names? We've got Domond, Francois, Pierre, and Yves all centered around this case. But anyway, so Pierre said that there were more than a dozen people who went outside to the corner near the gas station. The conviction report also gives the name of another man named Guy, Pierre would also state that he himself had an armed altercation with Gerard before reporting to police. Anyway, Pierre said that Domond went to his car, opened the trunk, and walked back holding his hand inside his jacket. When Hinkson said, "You don't scare me," Domond, standing about 6 feet away, pulled out a revolver and shot Hinkson in the forehead. Pierre said Domond fired a second shot, but it went into the sky because Yves struck Domond's arm. Pierre said he and the others ran back into the club and he did not know what happened to Hinkson. By this time, detectives had gone to 68 Kenilworth Place in Brooklyn, where Hinkson sometimes stayed. Detective Carlos Gonzalez would later say he collected blood from the steps of the building, and a police report listed the Kenilworth address as the place of Hinkson's murder. Gonzalez later admitted he threw the blood evidence away before it could be analyzed, claiming he had heard that it came from a cut on, quote, some girl's hand. Gonzalez in later years would achieve some notoriety for obtaining a false confession from Antron McCrae, one of the Central Park Five, and from Johnny Hinkson, both of whom were exonerated of crimes in New York City. So that's Gonzalez. On March 29, 1987, Pierre viewed a photographic lineup and identified Domond, whose birthday was on March 24th, the day after the shooting, as the man who shot Hinkson. On March 31st, police arrested Domond. He was charged with second-degree murder and criminal possession of a weapon. No witnesses could be found to corroborate Pierre's account of the shooting. At the time, Pierre was facing drug, gun possession, and robbery charges. Pierre said he was HIV positive and wanted leniency on his charges because he didn't want to die in prison. Pierre also wanted the return of a gold chain that he claimed Domond took from him. Pierre said he had gone to police after finding Domond with his girlfriend. There were some obvious problems with Pierre's version beyond the lack of evidence that a shooting occurred outside the club. The autopsy showed that Hinkson had been shot on the left side of his head, with the slug exiting the right side. Pierre claimed Hinkson was shot in the forehead, at one point saying he was shot between the eyes, pointing at his forehead. On April 18, 1989, the prosecutor in Domond's case entered into a written cooperation agreement with Pierre. In return for his testimony against Domond, Pierre was to plead guilty to fourth-degree criminal possession of a controlled substance and receive a sentence of 6 months in jail and 5 years in probation. Pierre pled guilty on April 20th, 1989. Pierre reached an oral agreement with the prosecutor, which was never disclosed to Domond's defense, that if he pled guilty to the robbery charge, the sentence would not be greater than the sentence of the narcotics case. On April 25th, 1989, Domond went to trial in Kings County Supreme Court. The prosecution contended that Domond was a drug dealer and that Pierre worked for him. The prosecutor told the jury in opening statements that Pierre decided to cooperate after Domond and Pierre had a confrontation during which both brandished weapons at each other and Pierre saw Hinkson killed. The prosecutor outlined how Pierre had pled guilty to the drug charge and noted that Pierre had spent the last 4 or 5 months in a Brooklyn hospital suffering from the AIDS virus, though Pierre did not, in fact, have AIDS. The prosecutor said Pierre, quote, has the virus and he wanted to get out, and that's the deal we made him. The defense contended that Domond was in Georgia at the time of the crime, attending a religious revival with several other people. Pierre testified that he provided security for Domond's crack dealing operation and that Hinkson sold drugs for Domond. At the time of the murder, Hinkson owed Domond $7,000 for drugs that Domond had given him to sell. Pierre told the jury that he went to the club with his bodyguard Carl and a friend named Gary. So now we've got 2 more people that we have names for. In total, we have Francois Pierre, Yves, Guy, Carl, and Gary as named witnesses, and an estimated dozen more people who witnessed this shooting. Domond, Hinkson, and Yves were already there. For the first time, Pierre said that Hinkson attempted to give Domond $2,000, but Domond tossed it in the air because he was owed $7,000. Pierre also said there was a scramble by people to pick up the money and that he pocketed $300. Pierre said that Hinkson punched Domond, contradicting his earlier statement that Domond punched Hinkson. After Yves broke up the fight, Pierre said they and about a dozen others went outside. Pierre said that Domond went to his car and returned with his hand under his jacket. He said that Hinkson said, "You're going to shoot me? Don't scare me, shoot me." Pierre said Domond drew a 9mm gun, he previously said it was a revolver, and shot Hinkson in the forehead. He said Hinkson fell backward onto the front bumper of a car. Pierre said he, Yves, and Domond fled in Domond's car. although he previously said he went back into the club. Pierre said that after Domond dropped him off at his drug dealing spot, he got a call from a man he knew was Dredd, who had been in the club. Dredd said he took Hinkson to the hospital and that Hinkson died. So here brings the question, is Dredd Paul Thompson? We don't know. So Pierre said that at about 5 p.m. on March 26th, he went to see his girlfriend Shirley and found Domond there. Pierre told the jury that Domond, quote, tried to screw my girlfriend. He said Domond drew a .38 caliber revolver and Pierre pulled out his 25-shot Uzi. At that point, Pierre said they backed off and Domond left. Pierre said he went to police and implicated Domond at 8 p.m. that night. During cross-examination, Pierre admitted that he told the police he would not cooperate in the investigation unless they helped him retrieve his gold chain. He also said he had served 6 months on the narcotics charge in the Kings County Hospital and was no longer in custody. Pierre contradicted himself on the witness stand. During questioning by the prosecutor, Pierre said Hinkson fell between 3 or 4 cars. During cross-examination, he said Hinkson fell on the hood of a car. Detectives testified they were unable to locate the man who brought Hinkson to the hospital. No other witnesses to the shooting testified for the prosecution. A detective admitted he had located Eves, but Eves was not called to testify. Fitzroy Taylor, a security guard at the nightclub, testified that there were about 300 people in the club on the night of the crime. He said Domond was a regular attendee, but he did not see him there that night. Taylor said he did not hear any gunshots, but conceded that the music was loud and there were no windows facing the parking lot where Pierre said the shooting occurred. Several witnesses testified that they were in Georgia with Domond on the day of the murder, including his mother-in-law, Blanche Moore, and his then-fiancée, Tracy, whom he married in May 1987. Moore testified that 15 people traveled from New York in her van to Donaldsonville, Georgia, for a religious revival. They left on March 21st, arrived on March 22nd, and stayed at the Rufus Motel for 4 nights, although she provided registration cards for only the nights of March 22nd and 23rd. None had Domond's name, but she explained that while only one person registered for each room, 2 people stayed in each room. 76-year-old Willie McDonald testified that he shared a room with Domond at the hotel for 3 or 4 nights, and that the room he rented was in his name. Moore, McDonald, and other witnesses testified that they celebrated Domond's 25th birthday on March 24th. Domond's then-fiancée, Tracy, testified that she purchased multiple birthday cards for Domond and that everyone on the trip had signed them. The cards were presented in evidence. There were no photographs of the party. Moore, as well as 2 other witnesses, also testified that they returned on March 27th, 4 days after the shooting. Moore said she drove Domond to meet with his parole officer, but Moore was mistaken about the date of return. In fact, she and the group returned in time for Domond to attend a hearing with his parole officer on March 25th. Moore had actually testified at a subsequent parole hearing that they returned on the 25th. However, Domond's defense lawyer failed to clarify the mistake by introducing testimony from the prior hearing. As a result, the prosecution then called Domond's parole officer, Joseph Cretella, as a rebuttal witness. Cretella testified that he met with Domond on March 25th. The prosecutor contended Cretella's testimony showed that the alibi witnesses were not credible. On May 3, 1989, the jury convicted Domond of second-degree murder and a criminal possession of a weapon. On May 30th, 1989, he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. So keep in mind that this is the main reason why Domond was found guilty, because the alibi witnesses were found to be not credible, because the attorney did not update the fact that the witnesses returned on the 25th instead of the 27th. In May 1993, the New York Appellate Division, 2nd Department, upheld the convictions. In February 1998, Domond filed a federal petition for a writ of habeas corpus, i.e. he wanted to challenge his conviction, and the petition was denied in April 1999. All right, so why was this petition denied? By this time, we have advanced bounds and leaps in technology from 1989. So for 10 years later, for them to look back at this case and still not grant him parole, I don't understand it. Domond appeared before the New York State Board of Parole in May 2013. At this hearing, he admitted to committing the murder. Parole was denied again. He appeared a second time in May 2015, during which he said his admission was false and said he was innocent of the murder. Domond apologized and said he made the false confession because he wanted to be released to help his ailing mother. Parole was again denied. Okay, so I'm definitely going to come back to this thing about parole at the end of this episode. So in August 24th, 2016, Domond appeared again before the parole board. He maintained his innocence and was granted parole. He was released on October 12th, 2016. So Domond was in prison from March 31st, 1987 through October 12th, 2016. So that's 29 years and 6.5 months. Meanwhile, in July and August, Domond's attorney, Ronald Kuby, sent 2 letters to the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office Conviction Review Unit asking that Domond's case be reviewed. The letters were the result of an extensive review of the trial transcript and pleadings by then-intern Ria Trivedi. By 2020, Trivedi was an associate at Kuby's law firm. Please take a second look at Mr. Domond's file, Kuby wrote. He emphasized the reports putting the location of the shooting at 68 Kenilworth Place instead of the nightclub. The untested and destroyed blood evidence, Pierre's, quote, highly motivated and uncorroborated testimony, and the monumental defense screw-up which undid the defense case and helped the prosecution. Kuby noted that one of the jurors actually worked in the parole office and knew Cretella, Domond's parole officer. Quote, no one knew until after the verdict, Kuby said. She told the judge in chambers and on the record that she and other jurors discussed Mr. Domond's need for a parole officer during deliberations. She told the judge that defense counsel's failure to cross-examine Cretella made his testimony more credible and worked against Domond. Quote, consider it another dull and the Matryoshka mess, Kuby wrote. 3 alibi witnesses mischaracterized the return date, nested within a failure to rehabilitate, nested within Officer Cretella's rebuttal testimony, nested within the juror's personal knowledge of Cretella. Instead of a 4-piece doll set, however, Mr. Domond got 25 to life. On October 30th, 2020, so almost exactly 4 years later, Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez announced that Domond's convictions were vacated and the charges were dismissed as a result of the Conviction Review Unit's investigation. In a 24-page report, the Conviction Review Unit said that Pierre had been housed in a hospital psychiatric unit for patients with psychological and mental problems, not patients with the AIDS virus. The review concluded that based on the documentary evidence in the prosecution's files and the opinions of 2 experts with knowledge of the unit where Pierre was hospitalized, that Pierre, quote, could have had a very serious mental disorder just days before he signed his cooperation agreement and testified at trial. The prosecutor knew that Pierre was in a psychiatric ward, but did not disclose this information or investigate it, the report said. Domond's defense was denied the opportunity to impeach Pierre at the time, who provided, quote, the only evidence of guilt. The report said that the prosecutor not only knew that Pierre was in a psychiatric unit, but also that Pierre had the AIDS virus, even though the prosecutor had a note in his trial file saying it was, quote, questionable whether Pierre actually had the virus. The report also said that the Conviction Review Unit was, quote, troubled by the prosecution's failure to disclose to the jury that the cooperation agreement included an unwritten understanding regarding Pierre's robbery charge. The report concluded that Domond, quote, was not afforded a fair trial. Pierre's uncorroborated testimony was the sole evidence, and the prosecutor failed to disclose that Pierre was hospitalized in a psychiatric unit for perhaps several months prior to the trial. Pierre, the report noted, had since died. Quote, there is no way to correct the error or determine the extent of the error to ensure a fair trial, the report said. Accordingly, the CRU recommends that the defendant's judgment of conviction be vacated and the indictment dismissed. Gonzalez said the conviction was the 29th to be vacated and dismissed following an investigation by the Conviction Review Unit, or the CRU. Following the hearing during which the charges were dismissed, Kuby declared, quote, after more than 3 decades of being branded a convicted murderer, Gerard Domond finally goes home to his family as a truly free man. He added, his mother's greatest fear was that she would not live to see this day. It was joyful beyond words to see her there in the courtroom when the charges were dismissed. In June 2021, Domond filed a claim in the New York Court of Claims seeking $28 million in compensation. The claim noted that he spent several years in solitary confinement, including one stretch of 6 consecutive years. The claim also goes on to say that at the time when Domond was wrongfully convicted and sentenced, his life had taken a turn for the better. As can be seen from his religious retreat he attended when the murder actually happened, he was establishing deeper ties with his religious community. He was married to Tracy Moore and was also co-parenting his twins from a previous relationship. However, his incarceration caused his family relationships to deteriorate, and he even had deaths in his family, including his brother and father, and his brother was apparently killed in retaliation for the murder that Domond did not commit. Domond was attacked and stabbed several times while in prison. Needless to say, there is no price that can be put on the pain and trauma that Gerard Domond endured. However, Domond received $8.4 million in compensation from the city of New York in 2022, and in 2023, he settled his claim in the New York Court of Claims for $5.5 million from the state. All right, now, keep in mind that Domond was released on parole in August 2016, but was not exonerated until 2020. So for 4 years, he pretty much had to make it on his own and fight for his innocence. At the time he was released on parole, Gerard was now 54 years old, had no work experience, no college degree, no money. So when he was finally exonerated and brought a lawsuit against New York, he was hoping to eventually get some money, but in the interim, he had nothing. In Domond's own words, he said, "I had to wait a long time, and I still didn't have what I wanted. I was daydreaming about if I have a few $1,000s, a job, I got a job. It's paying good, but I have a lot of expenses. Just the things that, you're playing catch up, but you don't really have it." Thankfully, Domond was put in contact with a company called U.S. Claims, which is a pre-settlement lawsuit funding company that gave him a $300,000 advance while he waited for his wrongful incarceration cases to play out. Domond goes on to say, "Just having financial freedom, bro. For a person that's been away so long, just to know I ain't got to live from paycheck to paycheck." Domond bought a house, a new car, and gave money to his children, who now have children of their own. The advance carried terms that worked in Domond's favor. He wouldn't have to make repayments until after any settlement money was granted, and if Domond didn't win his case against the city and state for any reason, he would not have to return a single penny to U.S. Claims. Now, those terms mean a big risk for companies granting funds to exonerees, so for them, ultra-high interest rates makes the risk worth it. In 2022, Domond won an $8.4 million settlement from the city of New York. His repayment to U.S. Claims for $300,000 was due immediately, along with an additional $143,000 in interest. If you want to know more about these types of advances and ways finance companies are helping exonerees, please check out the podcast On Point with Meghna Chakrabarti. And the name of the episode where I got the inspiration for my podcast is called Finance Companies Have a New Customer, the Wrongfully Convicted. Today, Gerard Domond lives at home in New Jersey, surrounded by trees. He says it makes him think of freedom. At age 63, as of March 24th, 2025, he's finally living outside of prison walls in a house with his family, including his 2-year-old daughter. In an interview, Gerard said, "It's like time stopped at 23, and I'll continue all this. So now I'm back out there. It's like trying to play catch up with a lot of what I missed out on." He goes on to say, "I grew up in jail, literally. All those decades were gone just like that." Although it's been 5 years since Gerard's exoneration, he still has flashbacks of being in prison. He said, "Sometimes when I make a reference to going upstairs, I say I'm going to my cell." He says each of his 10,775 days in prison was a struggle. "I wanted somebody to kill me. Yeah, I really did, because I didn't think I could do all that time," Domond said. "Every day now is a mental fight." Domond continues, "I was frightened to come home, put it like that, because this is a new world. It's like I was comfortable for some reason. I knew that I had to do it there, but for the most part, I'm lost out here." Domond went on to say that his family and building cars helps him to heal. Quote, "I'm going to therapy, but I have no peace. Money, everything, I have that, but it's still a burden. I'm searching for something. I don't know what it is. Part of me is in there." Still, Domond says, just like he never gave up on his innocence, he will not give up on feeling free. And that is the story of Gerard Domond. And with that, let's get down to some economics, point out some inefficiencies, financial opportunities, and some solutions to this dumpster fire of a case. Starting off with the most obvious for me is inspiration for my podcast, and that is finance companies providing upfront compensation for exonerees. This is a completely untapped market that I think is simply brilliant. Although it was not the full $13.5 million, Gerard was still able to get $300,000 from a private finance company to help him get on his feet that had very favorable terms. And although the interest is high because of the risk, it is well worth it for any exoneree, given the conditions that they don't have to pay back anything if the city and state don't award them a claim. But if they get a big claim, paying back with interest is also well worth it, depending on that exoneree's circumstances. And just to go on the philanthropic side, this type of loan does not have to stop with a private company. This advance money could come from a private individual that may not even look at this as an advance or a loan, but rather a charitable gift. There are wins on all sides. In addition, if this industry expands enough, instead of dealing with the individual, these companies could act as lenders for the government institutions that are giving out these claims. This will provide a direct incentive to not wrongfully convict people. Sometimes you have to hit them where it hurts, which is also a good segue into the tremendous amount of time and money wasted on this one case. I am by no means a lawyer, but from the little bit of investigation that I did, this was a murder case based on he said, she said, and just on that alone, the defense had more of a case. However, my solution, cases that are simply based on witness testimonies should get dismissed, especially in the year 2025 with fingerprints, DNA, and CCTV. If someone commits a crime and the only evidence is someone saying they saw so-and-so committing the crime, it's simply not enough for a conviction or even a trial. The judge should get the details from the prosecutor and defense and see this is not enough. In this case, the witness was Francois Pierre, and he was a real piece of work on his own. Says the victim was shot in the forehead when he was shot on the side of the head. He also said the victim was shot in a parking lot. The police couldn't find anything in the parking lot. Then Pierre says he only accused Gerard after he claims to have gotten into an altercation with Gerard because he thought he was sleeping with his girlfriend. And on top of all of that, Pierre agrees to testify to get less time on his own charges that have nothing to do with this case. So Pierre is not only the only witness willing to testify, but he is a bad witness with incentive to convict Gerard, who he also said stole his gold chain. Then there are the people that Pierre said also witnessed the murder. You've got Yves, Guy, Carl, and Gary, as well as an estimated dozen more people who were there. Not to mention he said he spoke to a guy named Dredd, who said he dropped the victim off at the hospital. So again, is Dredd the same Paul Thompson that went AWOL? Who knows? Why didn't the hospital keep Paul Thompson there until the police came? Anyway, the security guard, Mr. Foy, who helped Paul get the victim from the car, where was he in all of this? Pierre said Gerard had shot the victim after he retrieved the gun from his car. There's no mention of Gerard's car. There's no mention of the gun. Pierre even said that when he went to see his girlfriend, Shirley, and found Domond there, Pierre told the jury that Domond drew a .38 caliber revolver and Pierre pulled out his 25-shot Uzi. What kind of gun was used in this murder? Where was Shirley? So this isn't just a matter of the witness getting it wrong and changing his story. The police couldn't even corroborate his story because nothing was found at the supposed crime scene. Come to find out that Pierre was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility before the case could have been impeached from the proceedings. Instead, Domond's witnesses were found not to be credible because they got the return date of their trip confused and said it was the 27th instead of the 25th, which in this case is not important since the murder was committed on the morning of March 23rd. How a judge can take in all of this information and bring it to trial is beyond me. If the only evidence you have is a witness account, that should automatically infer reasonable doubt. It is simply not enough evidence. Finally, there's parole and false confessions. False confessions were a huge part of my first episode, but false confessions for parole are rampant in exoneree cases. Prisoners should not feel pressured into making false confessions. People believing they are not innocent, even if they are guilty, is completely different than someone not being sorry for committing a crime. But for someone who believes they are innocent and truly could be innocent because of lack of evidence, their case should be reviewed. I'm sure the parole board has all that information. All right, and that concludes episode 2 of Exoneree. This was Exoneree number 2, Gerard Domond. Just as a side note, I'm not sure if Domond's first lawyer was a public defender, but he probably was. Anyway, I heard a funny quote that goes, if you're guilty, get a public defender. If you're innocent, get a private lawyer. So yeah, just putting that out there. I can be reached at exoneree@gmail.com. That's XZONORY@gmail.com. My name is John, and whatever you do, don't get arrested.